Thank you for everyone for hopping on today's call. So good afternoon. And my name is Dylan Nguyen, and I have the privilege of serving as the co-chair of CNU Latino. On behalf of CNU Latino, one of the affinity groups within the Congress for the New Urbanism, thank you for joining us for another installment of our Patrimonio series. Whether you're joining us as a planner, an architect, a developer, a public official, student, or simply someone who loves cities and great places, we're grateful you're here. And if this is your first CNU Latino event, welcome, and we hope it's the first of many. Before we get started, I'd like to just take a moment to share why CNU Latino exists. The United States is increasingly shaped by Latino communities. Along with the language, the food, the music, and the culture, many Latino families also bring something that's less obvious, or we call a different spatial memory. For generations, many of us have experienced places where daily life happens in plazas, where neighborhoods are naturally walkable, where streets are places to gather, and where cities were designed around people long before they were ever designed around the automobile. Yet the planning logic behind those places is rarely studied in the United States, even though they influence the creation of cities across much of the Americas and continue to shape how millions of people experience places today. So CNU Latino exists to help bring that perspective into the conversation, not because it's better, but because we believe it has something valuable to contribute as we think about the future of American communities. Our goal isn't simply to preserve Latino urban heritage, it's to learn from it. And that's what the Patrimonio series is all about. Professionally, I've spent more than 20 years with Sotheby's International Realty, so I spend my days on the front lines of the housing market, seeing where design, value, and the decisions people make about where they want to live all come together. That's one of the reasons I'm especially excited for today's conversation. I'd like to thank Fernando Bajes Ruiz and Abran Zorrilla and our entire CNU Latino team for making today's conversation possible. Thank you for your leadership and for everything you've done to help build this community. Today's conversation asks a simple question: what can some of the world's most enduring cities teach us about building better places today? And that's exactly what we're here to explore. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Nir Buras. Dr. Nir Buras is an architect, urban designer, educator, and the author of The Art of Classic Planning, published by the Harvard University Press. While researching that book, he visited more than 100 cities around the world, studying why some places continue to flourish for centuries while others struggle to create lasting communities. Over the course of his career, he's contributed to some of the nation's most significant planning and infrastructure projects, including Grand Central Terminal's East Side Axis in New York, the Washington Metro expansion to the Dulles Airport, Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, and projects at the United States Capitol. Today, he'll help us explore what Latino urbanism can teach us about building places that are beautiful, resilient, and enduring. So with that being said, please join me in giving a warm CNU welcome to Dr. Nir Buras.
Good afternoon, and it's an honor to be here. It's a real pleasure. We would not be here without Andres Duani. I certainly am here. He encouraged me to found the Washington, D.C. chapter of the Institute of Classical Architecture and Art. And after the publication of my book, The Art of Classic Planning, the Classic Planning Institute was founded. And we're here to talk about I'm going to share screen now, the DNA of enduring communities. So I'm very happy to be here. And I want to just give you a quick introduction to the Classic Planning Institute so you'll know who you're hearing this from. We are a 501c3 nonprofit, and our charter is to steward the knowledge bases of the classical method through practice, teaching, and community engagement. The classical method is pretty much how we design cities before planning ruined them. Excuse me, any planners out there. But there have been drastic issues pertaining to the planning of cities, and we've seen all the problems that have occurred. Consequently, I wrote my book about the art of classic planning to try and create a foundation for the further work in line with enduring communities. To that end, this has several divisions: a library, a studio, an academy, a laboratory, a STOA for international conferences, a video project hasn't started yet, Extreme City Makeover. We have an international magazine, Classic Planning Herald, and essentially we're coming to you from the academy side. This is knowledge. This is our knowledge base. In the academy, we do teach. This is the first-year students' work. The Herald publishes this beautiful magazine about contemporary, new traditional architecture. And the work we do, all the work we do, this was designed for Baja California. All the work we do is very local inspired. All architecture is local. The idea of the library really stems from, and you will see this in action today, there's a lot of knowledge, but very few texts that actually make a difference when it comes to good urbanism. There's a lot of stuff out there, but actually there's very little that has worked over time. We're proposing that small amount of knowledge, maybe 100 books, maybe 500 books, even if it's 1,000 books, even if it's translated in 20 languages. You're looking at a library of 20,000 volumes. It's not large. There would be one on every continent or several on every continent. So you can access real books. We hold our conferences, our international conferences online. And these are the faces of the leaders of the new traditional movement. And if you took the Classic Planning Institute and designed a building around it, this is what it would look like. In all this, one of the most important things that we do teach is architectural literacy, because this is the lingua franca of the built environment. So you might hear me refer to items like everything is made up of 3 parts, that everything comes in 3 sizes, small, medium, large, that there are only 3 ways to connect rooms, whatever you've been taught. Yes, you can get an infinity of plans from only 3 ways to connect rooms. And the actual forms of architecture in all styles, including the modernist ones, are created with shapes, and these shapes are referred to as moldings, and there are only 8 of them. So it's even fewer than we have notes in music, far less than we have in reading literacy. And look at the stuff behind me. It's all made out of these few forms. This is the Parliament in Budapest, one of the most magnificent buildings in the world. It's all made out of 8 forms. So we're looking here at a language that is very potent. It has intentionally been not taught to us in past generations, and only people who really seek it out find it. But this movement of people is growing. And one of the things that gives us a special weight these days is that the neuroscience of design works in such a manner that when you look at a classical building, the brain does not know it's not a tree. And this holds for all traditional architecture. Modernist architecture is problematic because it actually stresses the brain rather than giving pleasure. You can intellect the pleasure thereafter, but actually the brain itself, in the early phases, which make all the difference in perception, are stressed. Traditional architecture lights up the beauty center in the middle of your brain, and we're going to be living in that world the rest of this hour, looking at the places that endure. So basically, the values that all good urbanism have are that architecture is central to urbanism. Stand in the middle of the street, you don't see anything else other than buildings. If you're looking at cars, you got a problem. The classical method, it's not just a style, it's a method, and actually several methods of dealing with the built environment, is genuinely holistic. It's based on the unity of firmness, commodity, delight, if you've ever heard of it. If you haven't, we'll discuss it in a minute. There's an idea of balancing town and country. You don't have town without country. You don't have country without town. And when you talk about green space or open space, it's actually meaningless. What's a green space? Okay? But everybody knows what country is. Everybody knows what parks are. Everybody knows what nature is. Everybody knows what fields, forests, and orchards are. And finally, it turns out, and this comes from the neuroscience, that manual construction might be essential for individual, planetary, and societal well-being. I'm saying this not lightly at all. This is not blood, nor is it some kind of a retrograde situation. I think that the idea of hands, half the brain is devoted to hands. Every one of you, half of your brains are devoted to your hands. When we don't use our hands, we become stupid. And we see this already once they took out handwriting from the school curriculum and so on and so forth. So keep your radar on for manual construction. This is kind of where it started, Spain, in terms of Latino urbanism. This is in Barcelona. You have this wonderful park and also a part of town which is called Pueblo Español, and it's got buildings that represent the 31 districts, counties, whatever you call them, of Spain, each one in its own style. And this was put together in 1929, same year that Mies van der Rohe's Barcelona Pavilion was built in Barcelona for the exposition there. It's such a marvelous place. And I got there accidentally visiting Barcelona to see the reconstruction of the Barcelona Pavilion in the early 90s. I was shocked that nobody had ever told me about this place. I was already a PhD student, and nobody ever had told me about this. So there's been such a forgetting of the best of what there is in our fields that we really need to create some kind of a reckoning with this. So moving straight forward to the Spanish colonialism, and we're going to focus on colonialism in the Americas, but the same holds for the Philippines, etc. These were all designed for coherent community that ensures continuity in place. The Americas were discovered in 1492, and by 1521, 30 years later, the general directive for the founding of cities was enacted. These people were very serious organizers, managers of their colonies. Yeah, you read all kinds of stories and a lot of weird stories and what have you, but the efforts that went into this are by 1523, 4 years after Cortez, I think I'm right on this, 1519, maybe 1517, I think 1519 sticks in my mind. He was getting instructions from Spain Central on how to create his settlements. There were rules for populating, and 1539 an edict by the Viceroy of Mexico calling for moderate designs, standardized designs for government buildings, churches and monasteries. It reads like somebody from the modern era. These people were way ahead of their times. By 1573, 80 years after Columbus ran into America, there were 2 Spanish towns in Hispanic America. The settlement was unparalleled. It was one of the biggest movements of settlement and of city building ever in the world. And the laws were enacted sort of partially in stages over time, over the next 100, 200 years. Some of the cities were moved. Havana was moved 3 times, Antigua, Guatemala as well. In some cases, the rules were applied 100 years after the cities were already established. So the ordinances specify very exactly where a settlement should be built, how many people are needed to start it, how to respond to climatic issues, and how to create an adequate food supply. So it starts from the basics. And there was a method there where you had surveyors coming to the sites that were discovered for settlement. They sent a kind of environmental impact assessment back to Spain Central, and which was the Consejo of the Laws of the Indies. And that went back with a plan. They created a plan in Seville, that's where the center was, and they sent it back. The little building here, the little image of the building here on the left is the actual offices of the Laws of the Indies, the management. This is an interior shot, and this, ladies and gentlemen, is the plan of Pico. So they did it, and it worked very well. Interestingly, they didn't invent anything from scratch. In fact, this was 100 years before that already, there had been a book that had been written by Vitruvius. He was a Roman engineer and architect that formed the basis for all the Law of the Indies stuff. It had been applied. That knowledge that Vitruvius wrote about, he wrote about it in about 35 BC. He wrote it during the middle of a lot of Roman settlement. The Roman castrum plan, which has 2 cross streets, the Cardo and the Decumanus, and a forum in the middle at the intersection. I mean, when we think city, when we think of Central Plaza with 2 main streets going in 2 directions, it already existed as a model. And the whole idea that you can extend something on a more or less orthogonal grid made a lot of sense, because the grid is the most efficient way of laying out settlements. So the principles from Vitruvius that were applied included all of his ideas about site selection. Wind analysis is a big deal. That has to do with how the site works climatically, and the plans were rotated so that you would have a plan for a temperate zone, a plan for an arid zone, and so on. You always had the forum and public space located somewhere important, and with radiating streets coming out of that. And interestingly, there was zoning by function to a certain degree, but the way they did it was that they would put a temple of the relevant god, Mercury for commerce, Zeus for government, and so on and so forth, Athena for knowledge, in the zone. So it was actually a spiritual zoning, not a use zoning. And you have to understand that the use-based zoning is what it is. In addition to that, Vitruvius had his proportion and symmetry. You see the Vitruvian man drawn by Da Vinci. This is not the ideal human body. That's not what this diagram shows. Yeah, it's a idealized human body. It shows the proportions necessary and the types of proportions necessary. And there are 8 types of proportion in classical architecture. Not going to get into that now. That are necessary for building a good-looking building. In that, there is this idea of firmness, commodity, and delight. Second mention, we'll get to it again, which is the underlying design philosophy. And also you have the water supply planning, which you can't have a settlement without water. Think of all the aqueducts that serve Rome, but think of all the aqueducts that serve all of the Mexican towns, for example, or Rio de Janeiro, or any other Latin culture place. So we got to this basic precept of a central plaza, a grid of narrow streets, which is common to every place. And by 18, you had 911 law of the Indies cities, towns, and presidios laid out, almost 1,000. This was topped only by the medieval era around the construction of medieval European bastides, which were actually real estate projects where they settled serfs in little towns because the owners, the lords, wanted to collect taxes rather than collect the product of these people, the serfs. Prior, they would give the lords what they grew and what they raised. This way, they just paid taxes and lived their lives. And this is from about 1000 AD, a plaza in a place called Egmont, that's missing an E after the T, between the T and the S, built by St. Louis in the mouth of the Rhone, and it's a completely livable town to this very day. On the same principle, you have the huge Zocalo of Mexico City, one of the largest. And this is not accidentally so. When the Spaniards came here to this location, this was the center of all the temples, of all the Aztec temples in Mexico. And there were these scaffolds with skulls of people who had been sacrificed. And there was one young accountant type, you're talking here the 15s, I suppose. One young accountant type counted all the skulls, or something like 120,000, 150,000. This place, you don't understand Mexican culture without understanding hugeness. And that's part of that culture. So moving right along in a place as pretty as Puebla, it worked very well. And what we see here is this intersection of firmness, commodity, and delight, durability, reusability, and beauty. Now, these 3 notions together create a unity, a trinity and unity that defines holism. This is the definition of holism. And it's also a description of the universe. But that's way beyond what we're talking about here. This notion of firmness, commodity, delight was known to Shakespeare, known to Jefferson, and he did Monticello and the university and all his other stuff based on that. An example of how all this works, it works through all the scales, from the whole plaza to the parts of it, the arcades and so on, and to the fountain. And the fountain in Puebla is so strikingly about water. You see that the side of it looks like a jug, like a vase. The steps look like waves. And you have water in 3 situations. One is water falling, descending. One is water being thrown up, and water in repose, water in the tank. It's the sort of normal, simple concept brought to life. And you can do this an infinite number of different ways. Think the Trevi Fountain is the same concept, but looks a little different, huh? So when we come back to the laws of the Indies, we're looking at several phases, and that's kind of natural. The first phases are just getting there and setting up shop and building a few institutions. The second was the rapid growth that came through the 17th century. Third phase was the 18th century, 19th century. You had additional peripheral grids for suburbs and railways and coming in, and institutions like theaters and jails and what have you. So this grew very organically, with the very end of the 19th century being colored by the impact of what Haussmann was doing in Paris. So you have a lot of Beaux-Arts architecture and beautiful buildings from that period. The actual planning process going back to that, we had mentioned the surveys. The surveys were submitted to the head office in Spain. Planners developed plans, and the plans sent from Spain to the new settlement for execution. And I'm going to walk you through the actual laws of the Indies are fairly long, but I'm going to walk you through these steps because they're so logical. They're so reasonable. And we don't do a better job today. The initial site selection was based on what expert discoverers came up with. The reporting requirements to the Council of the Indies, the Consejo de Indias, was not only of the site, but also its surroundings as their place for additional. They were already triangulating additional settlements around this. And the purpose of the settlement design was to serve both Spaniards and Indians. Very interesting how there's a good part of the laws of the Indies deal with how to deal with the Indians, and it's actually very reasonable when you read it, and for the most part. The application of it was colored by the individuals who worked that system, and the stories are, you've heard them, and they are what they are. So the attributes of the selected sites had to be elevated, healthful, defensible, fertile, with fuel, water, natives and access, open to the north wind, away from marshes and foul air. The sites had to be near water and materials, construction materials. You can make bricks, adjacent to farmland and pasture. Maritime location was very difficult, and we know from Campeche how the piracy was a big deal in those days, especially in the Caribbean. By the way, Pirates of the Caribbean, historically speaking, is very accurate, including the code, which is whatever. It was written by the guy who was the Woody Allen of pirates. Anyway, the plan for the settlement had to do with division all the way down to lots for individual families. But it was divided into public use land and cattle pastures. Vecinos, the free men, freehold people, were given 3 properties. They had a site for their house, a place for a vegetable garden, and agricultural land for pasturage and fields. Everything was laid out by cord and ruler. It was surveyed very accurately from the main square outward. The main square is the starting point of the whole design, and it was supposed to match the expected population size. So ranging from 200 by 300 feet to suit the size of the expected population. And that's why the Zócalo in Mexico City is so large and so small in other places. The streets around, the edges around the Zócalo, which is the Mexican word for this, it's called Plaza Mayor in most other places, were arcaded, typically, very much Place de Vosges from France. Arcading a street is an elevation of it, whereby you have the encroachment of private space over public access. And that's an elevation of concept that creates really the most pleasant places to walk through, and so on and so forth. Streets were wide in cold climates to let more light and more sun in, and narrow and hot ones, so you had the co-shading of building against building, and everything was designed with an eye to future growth. And this is San Miguel de Allende. You can see the plaza in the middle, and you can see the streets radiating from it. And one of the things they did was they oriented this in more comfortable climates. It went north-south, and they oriented it on the diagonal for climates that were more arid or less forgiving. And this is Yahualica. Does anybody here know Yahualica?
Have no idea.
I just found out about it today. Our social media guy married a woman whose family comes from there, and he started telling me about it, and we'll take a look at San Miguel and Yahualica. So this is San Miguel. This is the Zócalo of San Miguel de Allende. When I was last there, the trees were not cut in topiaries, but why not? You see the arcade surrounding and how the streets come out of the corner going north and east from this corner. In Yawalika, you can see that this was built in a different time, built to a much different standard, but it's the same idea, 100% the same idea. Oh, and look, the trees it must be some sort of a local fashion now to topiary these trees. Does anybody know anything about these topiary trees?
They don't grow in Denver, I'll tell you that much.
Okay, so after that, it was about establishing parish plazas, main buildings, and dealing with nuisances. So slaughterhouses, fisheries, tannery, they had to be located where their waste could easily be disposed of. Everything is very reasonable, logical. It's about creating a working town. There's no theory here. This is all practical stuff. Royal and Town Council Hall, Custom House, Arsenal are all sited near the church. The church is sort of considered the central location. Also, it was the place with a tower, so you saw it from a distance. It created the identity for these towns. In coastal towns, the main church should be visible from the landing place and built to double as a defense with a tower. They thought of everything and they wanted to have everything serve double duty. This is the church in San Miguel de Allende. There wasn't any need here for protection. This is central in the plaza. But you do see something that it looks like proto-Gaudi in the spires over here. In the plan here, this is where the church is down here at the bottom center. You can see the shadows, the Zocalo. And then you have here monasteries. Over here there's one. And I think there's one over here on the left. And subsequent plazas, small plazas, neighborhood plazas on the surrounding properties. Subdivision in lots was very important. They did something that anybody who's ever thought about lot size and distribution has struggled with. It's a very challenging topic. So what they did was they had two types of lots. Aside from blocks that they gave to monasteries and to the church and to the city hall and everything else, they had two allotment types, peonia and caballerías. Peones were farmers. Caballeros were people of basically rich and poor, if you will. Two sizes and two social groups within the freemen. And the caballeria was 92 by 108 urban lots. It's equivalent to 5 peonías. And their other properties were supposed to yield 780 bushels of wheat, 78 bushels of corn, 10 days plowing for a garden, 40 days plowing for unirrigated trees, and pasture for 50 sows, 100 cows, 20 mares, 500 sheep, and 100 goats. So these were sizable lots. They were on the periphery that they were given. 10 days plowing for a garden that was closer in, and then they had the pasturage in the fields further out. The peonia was 46 by 92, with land yielding 156 bushels of wheat and barley. Still supportable, so that a person born into the peonia rank could do well and buy several of these and become as wealthy as a Kabbalah descendants. You know how it is. First generation makes it, second uses, third loses. So you can see here in the aerial, the larger lots for the caballeros and the smaller lots for the peones. You can see it as like archaeology looking for footprints of dinosaurs, something to that effect. And they had a common, which they used for recreation and cattle pasture so that they could have it without encroaching on private property and so on and so forth. It's a very well-defined system. With the construction of houses, they were striving to keep the structures uniform for the sake of a town's beauty. And you have it here. You have the hierro on one side, and it was probably, by the size of it, this was also a caballero, but it sort of stopped at the first round of development, and this got installed probably in the 18th century. This is probably original, more or less, from the 16th or 17th century. And that was San Miguel de Allende, and the same thing over here in Yawalika, different climate, different place. And to just share with you, we had actually applied all of this knowledge in developing two projects. I'm going to show you one. The other one was actually a new settlement for displaced Haitians in Haiti after the earthquake of 2012. We designed a settlement system that was based on We had two models, one for 500 families, one for 2,000 families. That was based on the same principles. And it was a self-built community that the people learned how to construct their own houses. And were actually supposed to be given courses in how to run a community and run the institutions of a community. Here, this is a developer from San Diego who wanted to build a 1,000 lot project in Baja California. It's west of La Paz in the southern end of Baja California. 40,000 acre property, 28 miles of Pacific shoreline, 1,000 lot main town development. He wanted it modeled after San Miguel de Allende. He was thinking of 3 to 5 story buildings with tile and flat roofs, interior courtyards, skylit atriums, and we did a classic plan, Law of the Indies planning with a Zocalo, but we also gave a Plaza Maritima. The Pacific is pretty unforgiving at that part of the world, so we decided to keep an inland Zocalo and have a Plaza Maritima on the water. The surrounding block sizes were proportioned according to the law. Arcaded plazas and street widths and Zocalo dimensions came from San Miguel de Allende. Lot sizes, we tweaked those to 30 by 90 and 60 by 150. There was a basilica, which we designed in small, medium, and large parks. This is the site. It's got a 20-foot sand. I suppose this is sand. I'm not sure what it is actually underneath the sand. A bluff, apparently good for surfing. And this is the plan we came up with. The water is down here. It's a very diagrammatic plan. But you can get away with it when you're doing classic planning. You don't need the crooked streets. You don't need all that stuff. The eye creates the richness for you as you walk down the street. And as in Manhattan, although it's got a perfectly regular grid, no two blocks are the same. So what are we not learning from that? Okay? So we created the Zocalo over here in the middle of the whole thing, had the two streets coming out of it, east-west, and these are north-south. And the east-west streets actually connected to the highway leading out of town. The Plaza Maritima was along here, and we realized that we get more ocean frontage, which is a real estate value, by creating these kind of indents into the fabric. Suddenly you're tripling or doubling the most expensive lots that you have on the property. With over here was the city hall. This is the city hall. This was the cathedral. 2 markets on either side. The monastery would be the high school, and the rest of these lots would go to churches and schools and kindergartens and commercial. We didn't actually say where commercial had to be because we knew the commercial is always going to go in natural places. It builds itself. But what we did do was we created a hierarchy of small, medium, and large parks so that wherever you are, you're no more than 3 minutes walk from a park. In some cases, the park is surrounded by residences. In some cases, it splits a street. In some cases, it's part of the fabric. So there it is, with 15 to 16 foot high ground floors, 12 foot second floors, 10 to 12 foot third floors, and moving on up. We got something that looks like it's always been there. You can see here flat roofs, pitched roofs, and atrium roofs. You can see exactly where the cathedral goes. This is the Plaza Maritima. The markets are in here. We added these towers. That was our addition. This is where the convent high school would be, the playing fields for the school, entrance from out of town, and so on and so forth. Might look something like this. The Plaza Maritima, a standard street, might look something like this, especially the ones arcaded next to the center. And then we were asked to design a hotel for that location. And there are several hotels built in the early 20th century. This is by Carrere and Hastings, other hotels, mostly by the guys who built the Biltmore hotels. And what is very typical of them is really a curious thing. You see the towers. These towers are modeled on the Giralda Tower in Spain, in Seville. Now, all tall buildings in the world started out as being developments of the Giralda in Spain, the Campanile in Venice, the tower in Siena. These are the iconic towers. They have tops that are recognizable, and they have divisions, vertical divisions that lend them so much grace. And we thought, that would be a good idea for us to do. We can do that. So we took the plan of the breakers and somewhat shifted it around to look like this in massing and put the Giralda on the corners over here to announce our hotel in Baja California. And these are the elevations for that. And it might have a feeling something like this. But probably the building we're most proud of designing is the cathedral for Baja. If it looks remotely Mexican, it's because of the proportioning systems. I'm not going to get into that right now. And there are a lot of architectural tricks that went into creating this so that it looked like it belonged. And this is the arcade next to it around the Zocalo, the central square of the town. So that's what we do. We leverage authenticity and beauty in our work, and we've done work around the world so far. And if you'll allow me, I'd like to share just a few pictures. This is something we designed actually for the Near East, rebuilding Gaza, new construction in Jerusalem, Aleppo, bombed out neighborhoods in Iraq and Syria. We were looking for something that kind of looks like it belongs in terms of the style, and we call it New Levantine architecture. And the density is much greater than anything. This is New York level density, probably even greater than New York level density. But these buildings are all based on having atria inside. So these are basically shaded areas, comfortable for the climate. And we used as a precedent some beautiful buildings designed. They are Haussmann-style buildings designed in the early 20th century, in the 20s in Algiers. Just beautiful buildings. We worked in Indianapolis, creating about a mile of fabric, and got to design one of the buildings along Indiana Avenue here, inventing a new style for Purdue that was supposed to be a dorm building for the university that connects the collegiate Gothic with the location. And believe me, the canal there exists. It's the Central Canal in Indianapolis, and it has gondolas on it. We did not invent that. That's not from the rendering. But notice the water element, which is supposed to work with the canal, and so on. Just a nice place to sit, a nice place to walk past. Something here in our neighborhood to the north, sort of a standalone, very dense neighborhood that we were asked to develop with some more or less nice views from it. And what do you do with a curved element when it's handed to you, creating buildings that you want to live in and want to be next to? Portland, Maine, we participated in a transportation facility beautification project. And these are basically, there's just a metal shed on this dock. It's where the large ships come into Portland. This is also redesigned the ferry terminal and got a bonus building out of that and a small market at that end. This is actually the parking lot for loading onto the waiting area for loading onto the car ferry in Portland, Maine. There's no reason that it can't look as nice as this. Some more work also in our neighbor to the north. One of my favorite images. This is 100% design. Every single brick here, we designed it. And the rendering is courtesy of Silver Shadow in London. They are among the best out there. And a canal side development that we did recently, summer, winter views, same place, looking the other way. We used in rendering the trees, the people, the furniture, but the buildings are all drawn down to the last stone because you can't afford hallucinations in this stuff. So what we do is, and what Latin urbanism does, is plan cities based on community aspiration, understood that there's no good urbanism without good architecture. It's planned and designed for the long term, respect for the magic of place very much, and balancing town and country. So the DNA of places that endure is the DNA of civilization. And it's true everywhere, in India, in China, in Japan. This is European culture. It looks like this. So what? And this is the making. And the DNA of civilization is the making and enjoyment of cities and their communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Neer. I am going to share my screen, and we've got some questions that we're going to be going through. So again, thank you so much for sharing your time, your research, and your passion with us today. On behalf of everyone at the CNU Latino and all the audience, thank you for reminding us that great places don't happen by accident, that rather they're shaped by principles that have endured for generations and communities that continue to pass those lessons forward. So before everyone signs off, just a quick few announcements and we'll dive into the questions. This October, we'll continue the Patrimonio series with a visual conversation currently titled, Why Doesn't America Build Places Like This Anymore? And we'll be featuring Professor Michael Dennis and acclaimed architect Pablo Alvarez Funes from Spain. We'll be sharing registration details soon, so be sure to follow us, CNU Latino, both on Instagram and finally, we're excited to announce and I'm going to share my screen here, one moment. Here we go. We're excited to announce that we will be launching our CNU Abroad from March 17th through March 20th in 2027. We'll travel together through the Mayan jungle, through Mérida, Izamal, and Campeche in Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula for an immersive learning experience, exploring some of the most enduring places in the Americas. So again, I hope you'll join us. And there's the slide for Izamal, Mérida, and Campeche. Let's go through some of these questions, Dr. Neer. So the first question that we have is, for those of us working in cities that are already built, this can feel overwhelming. We can't simply bulldoze places like Phoenix or Houston and start over. So where should we begin? What practical first steps can us as planners, elected officials, and developers take to apply lessons from the laws of the Indies and Latino urbanism when retrofitting existing American cities? And the follow-up to that is, how expensive is this type of development/architecture in comparison to the stuff that's being built today?
Well, I'll answer the first question first. When you're building to a certain quality level, and we know that 5/2s are not quality anything, but if you're building a real building, it's going to cost the same. Anything over 40,000 square feet costs the same regardless of style. So in general, you can do anything in any style that you want. If you're trying to create a sow's ear intentionally, that's as low as you can go. And probably there's lower for those who really try. But the idea of buildings as a financial instrument is simply wrong and has to be removed from the equation, because that is people who don't understand what community is, don't understand what city life is. They're really not part of the community doing this. So in terms of the overwhelm, don't be overwhelmed. Most of places like Phoenix are simply unsustainable, and we all know that already. And one of the problems that happened, you ask yourself, what is sprawl? And the answer is that sprawl is Garden City by Garden City. I guarantee that there aren't 10 people here who ever read Ebenezer Howard and read sorry for saying it this way, it doesn't sound nice. Few people have read Ebenezer Howard, and nobody almost knows, I didn't know until I read it again in my dotage, that he focused not on the built fabric, but on the countryside between the built fabrics. He said, at 30,000 people, build a new one and put it miles away from the first, separate it with countryside where you grow your tomatoes. So you don't need vertical farming, which is one of the most curious ideas out there, and so on and so forth. We don't need to find technological solutions. We need to adapt our fabric for human life. So, since much of the fabric is unsustainable, my guess is that there will be a process of villagization and densification, and starting with triage. Which are the neighborhoods? Which are the buildings, the houses that are the least sustainable? And they're probably the newest built ones, is my guess, because stuff that was built in the 1920s, it needs updating now in the 1930s, needs updating now in 1980s, needs updating now in 2000, needs updating now. So we have to rediscover the whole idea of reusability and start creating urban fabric like it's supposed to be. But we don't have that knowledge at hand. There are very few people who actually understand urban fabric and putting it together. CNU is challenged by the whole idea of form-based codes and so on and so forth that have yielded what they have yielded. So what can I say? Don't be overwhelmed. We actually have a method for approaching this. And the method is we work directly with the community. We have an aspirational process. I can tell you about that more later on. We do analyses that will tell you exactly where and in what sequence you want to recountrify parts of your city, and then work with and we're doing this. We've done this with several municipal groups, and I can't really name them right now, but there's a process, and you can find out more if you contact us directly.
Dr. Neer, we have another question here. It says, the laws of the Indies gave cities a coherent framework from the very beginning. In the United States, we have zoning codes, subdivision regulations, parking minimums, transportation standards, right-of-way, that often pull in completely different directions. If we wanted to rewrite the rule book, where would you start?
There are two things that really happened. One was this business of the sprawl of the contiguous garden cities, contiguous suburbs. Suburbs have to be separated out. The other one is, and this happened, and I researched this pretty deeply, read the Macmillan Commission plan document, and it's the single most beautiful urban design document you'll ever read. Macmillan Commission, it's the report on the Parks Commission from 1903. That's in Washington, D.C. Then read from 1912, I think it was, or 1915, the Plan for Ottawa by Bennett, who was Burnham's partner. And you recognize something very striking. It is car-oriented. After 1909, when the Model T came out, all planning became car-oriented. First and foremost, the guys wanted to be fashionable. They wanted to be trendy. They wanted to be in. And technology was the future. Everybody knew that. And that idea continues today. Solutions come from a technological side, not from a human life side. So everything that has to do with cars, you need to look at, again, AASHTO is based on the idea that people are stupid and cars are dangerous.
Well, that brings me to my next question then, Dr. Neer, and I know we're getting here towards the end. James Howard Kunstler writes the book, The Long Emergency. He can be a little bit pessimistic, but I think there's something in the DNA of the book that he talks about, that we've been developing these American cities for the past 100 years under the assumptions of cheap fuel, it's like a creamy center nougat, and oil just is everywhere. But we've seen the challenges when he argues that the 21st century is going to be marred with lots of challenges headed our way. Is there anything that we can learn from the laws of the Indies and the towns that were planned that we can implement to make us resilient to those changes? Because we've learned that fuel costs and the shock of fuel costs are affecting us. I mean, look at what's happening Strait of Hormuz, Iran, and everything's fluctuating. And you've got everything happening with the treasury bonds and interest rates and the money borrowed to finance construction. Then you have climate change and the pandemics and everything on top. Is there anything we can learn from these cities? Are they resilient to that more so than a typical American, a Dallas or a Houston or a Los Angeles?
Oh, we know that those cities you mentioned really long-term are probably not very sustainable. At some point, something's got to give. Today, you're driving from Burbank to downtown an hour and a half during rush hour. It's ridiculous. What you learn is if you took all of the tall buildings in Manhattan and laid them down, you'd have a 5-story city. Even Paris is taller than that. Okay, Paris is 5, 6, 7 stories. So the 5, 6, 7, 8, if you will, stories is pretty much the limit of how high we can build and live without an elevator. Now, we take these things for granted. We think that it's the way things are supposed to be. But if we don't have them, number one, we'll be healthier. The whole obesity thing is by spreading sideways rather than not building short, building up to 5 stories, normal urban fabric. We don't have much of that, but we have some of it in some of the city centers. And unfortunately, the car came in 1909, and after World War I, where the influenza, the epidemic, there was such a disruption in culture that it is unfathomable, and we are still reeling from it. So the last drop of fuel will probably go to an AI data center, and then the whole world is going to go dark. But until then, maybe we start building again fabric that we love to live in, love to be in. Modernism has created 55% of global warming, and add to that the 15% of car-related emissions and fuel and all that stuff that people escaping, commuting from sprawl suburbs to basically nighttime dead centers or workplaces. And let's have some organic, holistic construction.
Development. Dr. Neer, we have one more question, and thank you, by the way, for that. Our final question is, if conventional zoning makes the traditional mixed-use neighborhood supported by classical planning and Latino urbanism difficult or illegal to build, should cities continue trying to reform zoning, or should they consider removing zoning altogether and regulating development through building, design, public space infrastructure, and nuisance standards instead?
You don't even need the nuisance standards. There's a key here. It's a little bit metaphysical, but you got to follow what I'm going to say here. The idea of a unity of truth, goodness, and beauty is all about good stuff. Nuisance is fear of nuisance. Zoning is a fear-based way of doing things because you're afraid of what's going to happen or not happen next to you. The whole idea of traffic planning the way it's done today is based on the idea, like I said, people are stupid, cars are dangerous, and accidents are going to happen. Well, after 100 years, 150 years of traffic design, 120 years of traffic design in Manhattan, it still has the same number of vehicle deaths as it had 100 years ago. It's 50% less deaths than 100 years ago because they had an equal number of death by tram in 1900, which we don't have today. So we're spending a lot of money doing nothing. And we really need to rethink all these things. The way to approach traffic is through the neuroscience. And this is a whole other field, but we are leaders in this too. It turns out that cars are perceived by humans as large animals. And there's a huge fear factor just from a car sitting in the street. You can test this on yourself. So what we need to do is disappear the cars from the streets. I'm not ever going to say pedestrian-only neighborhoods because you don't want that. You don't want to lose the cars. They're part of life. But you don't want to have them in there in a place that they don't support anything. So it's really rethinking everything. And I invite all of you wonderful people, thank you for being here. And thank you for being friends of Dylan, who is so inspiring. Anna Brown and the other people at CNU Latino. You're all classic planners. If you're interested in this, you're already classic planners. And I think that classic planning is the thing that you can bring to the CNU to take it to the next level because we haven't seen it. You know what I'm not saying. So I want to thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Neer. Everybody, please follow Dr. Neer. And Doctor, I'm just going to go on a limb here, but if these cities, let's say someone who's working for the city of Dallas or Los Angeles who were on the call today, can they consult with CPI on looking at how they can make their cities resilient for the 21st century and how to adopt these classical planning methods to create beautiful places in their cities? Can they reach out to you in the CPI?
Absolutely. And I see here Professor Pablo Alvarez Funes, who's going to speak at the next talk. He is our Director of Education and also a member of the CPI studio. So everybody contact us. We're here to help. Our motto is, how can we help?
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Neer Buras. Thank you, everyone. We hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and we can't wait to see you on our next webinar. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.